Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to AJ108 Criminal Investigation. My name is Tony Farrar, and of course, I am your instructor for this semester. So, this week's lecture is going to cover Chapter 13, where we are going to look at burglary. And as with other chapters, we do have a lot of things to cover, so I'm going to go ahead and just jump right into this morning's lecture. So, to start off with, by way of introduction, the word burglar comes from the German word Burg, meaning house, and Ladon, which means thief. Now, burglary is reported by frequency and the value of property stolen and recovered. And when they talk about reported, not only per agency, but also when every agency reports their end of the year statistics to the FBI, burglary is then also reported by frequency and by the value of the property stolen and recovered. And finally, a 30-year decline in burglaries is due partially to some improvements in things like locks and burglar alarm technology, and then other things that we can implement to deter burglaries. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So, as with our previous lecture talking about robbery, I thought it would be good to begin with the FBI crime clock. And you already know what this is, so I don't have to go into detail. But I did want to show you that now that we're dealing with property crime, so remember, there are some differences. We talked about robbery, which is up here in the violent crime area, and now we're going to be talking about burglary, which is a property crime. And the scary part, again, if you look at the numbers throughout the United States, burglary, there is one burglary that occurs every 25.7 seconds. And a little bit more scary, I guess, a property crime in general, out of all of these, every 4.4 seconds. So that's kind of a scary thought. And when you think of burglary, this is kind of what we think of. You know, we watch TV and we watch movies and we get a lot of these ideas about burglars. But they're not always dressed like this. This isn't the typical uniform, if you will, or outfit that a burglar would actually wear, because they come in all, these individuals come in all shapes and sizes and ages and gender, etc. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And here's an example of an attempted burglary where an individual caught this person on their ring. That's that little doorbell video camera type thing, which I have, which is actually a really good deterrent, if you will. And you can see that he's not wearing the same outfit as what we typically depict or think a burglar would actually look like. So again, there's a lot of variation when it comes to burglaries and those who commit these types of crimes. Another, burglary, sometimes there's more than one individual where they'll travel in groups to commit certain types of burglaries. There's the window smash type burglaries. And there's, going into a back door using a sliding glass door. So there are all these, and anywhere in here, do you see the stereotype of the average burglar wearing the knit cap pulled over their head, all dressed in black pants, a big black jacket, looking like something out of the Matrix or something like that? You don't see that because that's typically not the way that an average person would dress. Okay, so recall back from chapter 12 that a burglar seeks to avoid contact. So we're going to start off talking a little bit about burglary versus robbery. And robbers, they in fact confront their victims directly because that's how they're going to commit their type of crime. And then remember, burglary is a crime against property and robbery is a crime against a person. So we have those distinctions. So again, burglary is a property crime, and they're hoping that no one is at home when they commit this type of offense. Sometimes that's not the case, but robbery is going to be confronting directly whoever that might be, whether it be the case as the photo here being a bank robbery, a liquor store robbery, a street robbery. It doesn't matter. There's still going to be a direct confrontation between the suspect and the victim individual. So now let's define burglary. So burglary is the unlawful entry of a structure to commit a crime. And that's kind of your textbook definition. But there really is a little bit more. And especially if you were to focus on California. So the more is entry is into a location is actual or constructive. And we'll talk about what that means in a little bit. The structure in that definition can mean a building, a dwelling, a structure, or a lot of different things, and I'll show you what those are when we actually look at the California definition. Burglary requires specific intent, meaning that your intent is to go in, and finally, to commit petty theft or any other felony. So that's your intent. So it's a little more than unlawful entry, of a structure to commit a crime. There's going to be some definitions regarding, like, well, what is entry? Then there's going to be some questions on, well, what is a structure? And then we talk about intent, and then to commit a crime. Well, what type of crime? Well, California, it says petty theft or any other felony. So again, but that's kind of your textbook definition. Now, when you look at California, you can see there's a lot. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but what I'm trying to tell you is if you look up here, and remember, just like with robbery, it has elements to the crime, burglary is no different. So if you're going to establish a burglary, every person who enters any, and look, we're very definitive in California, house, room, apartment, tenement, shop, warehouse, store, mill, barn, stable, outhouse, okay, tent, so your tent, or any vessel, meaning boat, or a floating home, maybe a houseboat, right? A railroad car, a locked cargo container. You can see here, any house car, meaning a camper, or a motorhome. So it's very definitive. Any vehicle when the doors are locked, an aircraft. And then, it kind of ends up with, again, so here's all the stuff. So it's not just like any building, it's all of this. And then it goes on to say, with intent, so you have to have the intent. If you can't prove the intent, you're not going to prove a burglary. To commit grand theft or petty theft, and that's a dollar value, or any felony. So if your intent was to go in and do something else, like sexually assault someone, you still did a burglary. Does that kind of make sense? And then again, it kind of clears up a couple of other things. But that's the California definition, so you can see the magnitude and how much more definitive we are. Okay, so let's talk about classifications of burglary. So most burglaries occur in unoccupied homes and businesses. Now that doesn't mean that they're vacant, it means that they're not occupied at the moment, right? So because of that, few witnesses exist. So, if they're going to burglarize a commercial building, it's going to be after closing time in the middle of the night, so there aren't going to be that many people around. So hopefully that makes sense. And few alarms are given to provide advance notice to police. So again, these are going to be kind of, in unoccupied circumstances. Now, the best chance of apprehending a burglar in the act are when a silent alarm is tripped, meaning one that they can't hear, a surveillance camera records the crime, a witness sees or hears suspicious activity, and then they call law enforcement, or police actually observe the burglary in progress. And that's happened in a couple of, happens quite often. So, however, though, just kind of keep in mind, most burglaries are not solved at the crime scene, but through subsequent investigation. So a lot of times the alarm might go off, but by the time we get the notification of the alarm, we dispatch the officer and they get to the location, the person is usually gone. But a lot of people are arrested through subsequent investigation. Now, burglaries, just like robbery, they have classification. So burglaries are classified as either residential or commercial. And you could probably figure out which of the two, kind of what they mean, but let's talk about them a little bit. So a residential burglary occurs in buildings, structures, or attachments that are used as or are suitable for dwelling, even though they may be unoccupied at the time of the burglary. So there doesn't have to be someone in your house at the time to make it a residential burglary, even if it's unoccupied. So residential units would include things like private homes, mobile homes, cabins, apartments, rooms within a house that are leased, let's say, by a renter, houseboats that people live in, or that they used for a dwelling, and any other structure that's suitable for and used for a dwelling. So remember I talked about tents, right? So if you're camping, that is suitable for dwelling. So in the California definition, that's why you see that in there. So a little myth before we move on. Most residential burglaries happen at night under the cover of darkness. Now, that's kind of a myth, because if you were to read a little bit further in the chapter, you'll find that more occur during the day when people are at work or at school or somewhere else on vacation or something like that. So it's not the nighttime creeper type thing that you always watch on TV. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but the numbers are typically more occur during the daytime. So let's take a look at that. So nearly 3/4 of all burglaries are residential, that fall into that definition of residential. And we're talking data from 2013. And of these, more than half took place in the daytime. So you can see the numbers. You had, a little over 775,000 in the daytime compared to maybe almost 400,000 at night. And residential burglaries are often committed by juvenile offenders and young adults. And you have to kind of just ask yourself why. Why would that be? Well, one of the reasons could be, typically the targets are cash items to convert to personal use, or items that they can, and the technical term is fence or sell. Things like flat screen TVs or radios or computers, guns, jewelry, tools, and other small items. And residential burglaries also, they typically occur during weekdays. And the reason for that is because most people are at school or work. On the weekends, most people tend to be home. So being able to map that out and knowing when, what time and what day of the week is another important aspect in investigating burglaries. So here are a couple of photos of, what a house might look like after a burglar gets done. Now, they don't always trash the house, but a lot of times it's going to look like this because they're searching for anything that you may have hidden. So, little bundles of cash or a firearm or something else. So they're going to kind of tear your house apart looking for that. And this is really going to traumatize you a little bit, because if you've ever been victimized in a burglary, it kind of hits home. You get that really weird feeling that somebody else has been inside your house. And again, you may think right now, whatever, but it's not whatever, because again, if you've been victimized, you're going to feel that weird trauma that comes about as being victimized. So whereas the study of burglary and related crime rates has historically focused on the offender, some new theories shift the focus toward the victims and particular times and places. So for example, there's a theory called the routine activity theory. And this proposes that crime results from the simultaneous existence of three elements. And the first one is the presence of likely or motivated offenders. The second would be the presence of a suitable target. And then the third, the absence of guardians to prevent a crime, meaning like law enforcement. And when these three things are there, you have the motivated offender, you have nobody guarding or there's no protection, etc., and you have that suitable victim, they come together, that creates the opportunity for somebody to commit a crime. And this theory acknowledges the role, however indirect, of victims in their own victimization. And it suggests that certain locations may be more susceptible to burglary at certain times because of the routine absence of the residents. So this is kind of, you'll read about this a little bit more in depth if you were to take a criminology course on why criminals do what they do and why they commit crimes, etc. Routine activity theory is one of the theories that is typically discussed. So again, plug for AJ112, Introduction to Criminology, if you want to know a little bit more about theories of crime. Okay, so let's talk now a little bit about commercial burglaries. So we've talked about residential. So a commercial burglary is one that involves commercial businesses. So it can be a lot of different things: churches, schools, barns, public buildings, shops, offices, stores, factories, warehouses, pharmacies, vet clinics, railroad cars, all those different things that I kind of mentioned earlier. And most commercial burglaries are committed in places like service stations, gas stations, stores, schools, manufacturing plants, warehouses, and office buildings. And burglars often specialize in one type of facility because they're looking for a certain thing. Businesses located in out-of-the-way places are more susceptible as well because of, let's say, the lack of police or maybe even lighting and few witnesses. So they're kind of off the beaten path. And typically, commercial burglaries are going to occur when the establishment is closed, and that kind of makes sense because there's going to be no person there watching. And along with that, you have to consider that the buildings, these commercial buildings, they might also be cased in advance, meaning that somebody's watching to see if, let's say, they have security guards at night, or is there only a security guard for a half an hour as they drive from this commercial building and then they leave and they continue on their security route. And typically commercial buildings or commercial burglaries are committed by two or more individuals. Not always, but a lot of times it's going to be two or more. So again, considerations for commercial burglaries. And if you kind of think about it, if you go to like for the city I worked in, if you go to the south end of town, you're going to have these commercial buildings that look like this. And yeah, there's going to be some lighting out there, of course, but that's going to be it in the middle of the night. There's nobody there. And again, you might have a security person that rotates from business to business, but they're not always going to be there. Some businesses have that luxury and some don't. So just another consideration. So businesses where drugs and chemicals used to manufacture drugs are and kept on site are becoming increasingly popular targets for burglars. For example, ketamine, a very common anesthetic used by vets, is a drug being used recreationally now and produces kind of a hallucinogenic effect. And it's also used a lot of times to facilitate date rape. Prescription pain medication sold at pharmacies is another attractive target for burglars because of the high demand on the black market, because these pills you can sell for quite a bit of money. And again, as I said before, these types of burglaries are often committed by 2 or more people, depending upon the type of premise, the size of the location, and the plan of attack, meaning how are they going to approach it. But pharmacy and drugstores are becoming targets again because of the types of drugs that are available. So, talking just a little bit more about the elements of burglary and giving you some kind of key information. So, although burglary laws, they vary from state to state, just like some of these other laws, and robbery as well. Statutes of all of the states typically include 3 things. So even though our textbook gave us, let's say, that generic, definition, and you saw that California was much more defined, and that, that we know that sometimes states have different definitions, you're going to see 3 things at least that are going to overlap. And one is going to be the entering of a structure, meaning going in. And we'll talk in detail more about what that means. Without the consent of the person in possession. So, meaning that you're going in without someone's consent. And then finally, the intent. You've got the intent to commit a crime therein inside. In some places, it's going to be a theft or another felony. Some it's just going to be another felony. It depends on the jurisdiction, but you're going to see those things overlap a little bit. But these are typically some key elements that you'll find in all state statutes. So again, I'll throw this question out before we move on. If someone enters a home to commit a sexual assault, can they also be charged with burglary? So think about it. If you look at the California definition, with intent to commit, grand theft, petty theft, or any other felony. Well, if sexual assault's a felony, then the answer is going to be yes. They can still be charged with burglary because their intent was to enter and do what it said in that section. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. All right, so I told you I was going to touch on some of these areas. So those 3 key elements, let's look at those just a little bit closer. So let's talk about entering. So paths of entry may be through an open door, a window, or even a ventilation shaft, or a hole in the wall, or even a tunnel that was dug. Means of entry can be by jimmying a door or a window, or even reaching through an open door or window with a long stick or pole. Climbing a ladder or stairs outside of a building, descending through a skylight, hiding in an entryway, and then the place closes and then you're in there, or breaking a window and taking items from the window display, which is called a smash and grab. Entry also includes, again, remaining in the store until after closing and then committing the crime. Because remember, what was your intent? Was to go in there and commit this crime. So if you're hiding, that helps show your intent, right? So I think we're getting there. We kind of sort of should have an understanding on what entering means. Now, in a lot of statutes, no breaking is necessary, meaning you don't have to break something open. The offense is complete the moment entry is made, as long as the person intended to commit the theft or felony. So think about it. If you have an open window, and I walk by and your computer is sitting on a table right inside the window, and I reach inside, is that a burglary? Stew on it for a second, but you should be able to answer that. So no breaking is necessary. And here's some examples of entry. Now, a lot of them you'll find are forced. A lot of burglars will force entry, and a lot of them will look for something open, an open window, an open door, etc. And some of them will do some kind of ingenious entries. Well, here's what we call a door kick, where they kick along that deadbolt and just kind of force the door open. We talked about a window smash. So that's smashing out a window by definition and then going inside. Sometimes prying, so prying a screen open, and this type of old window is that these are those louvered windows, and you can just kind of slide those slats of glass out of the way and you can climb in. All right, so now let's talk about consent, and then we'll move on to the last one. So consent, meaning, without the consent of the person. So to constitute burglary, the entry must be illegal and must be done without permission of the person having lawful authority. That is the property owner, the legal agent of that place or location, or the person in physical control of the property, such as a renter or even a part owner. So all of these, individuals could constitute, they're the property owners. So if you don't have consent, then it's going to be illegal. And then finally, intent, with intent to commit a crime. So regardless of whether that burglary was planned well in advance or committed on the spur of the moment, you still have to show intent. So, the first two elements, when the first two elements that we talked about are present, meaning entering and the consent, the third is kind of often presumed. That is, if a person enters a structure without somebody's, consent, the presumption is that it is to commit a crime. Does that kind of make sense? That's a presumption, but you need to be able to prove that. Because I'll just throw this out. Could somebody be so intoxicated where maybe they walked into a house that's not theirs? Maybe the door was unlocked and they opened the door and then staggered inside. Well, they entered a structure without the person's consent. Does that make sense? So you still have to be able to prove that third piece, that there was intent to commit that theft or that felony. So hopefully this kind of helps add to the definition. All right, so just a little bit more in those three elements found, right now we're going to talk a little bit about some additional elements that are found in the laws in some states. So a minute ago I talked a little bit about no breaking. Well, some states have that, so let's talk about that. So breaking. So actual breaking is a matter of interpretation. Any force used during a burglary to enter or leave the structure, even if a door or window is partially open or closed, constitutes breaking. An entrance through trick or ruse, meaning that you're falsely representing yourself, or through threats or collusion with any person residing in the building, would also be breaking. So as I said before, California is very specific, but the breaking doesn't have to actually be prying open breaking or breaking the window. It can actually just be reaching in, or reaching in with a long pole to grab, to pick something up and pull it back out of the window. Or if the window's, not open wide enough, just kind of pushing it with your hand or squeezing through. A couple of states have it very definitive. If you were to break that plane, so if it was somebody left their front door open but the screen was closed, once your foot breaks the plane or any part of your body in that entryway, that constitutes entering. So some states have it very, very specific. And then again, entering through trick or device is also considered burglary, and because the intent. So if you pose as a Southern California Edison guy, or a water guy or something else, to get into the house to commit a theft, that's going to be burglary if your intent was to do that. That's the enter part, so that still counts as entry. So again, and that happens where people actually might pose as cable, selling cable, or selling, different systems or something, where they walk around your neighborhood. Some are legit and some aren't. Some are actually just kind of casing. Another issue when we talk about the elements of the crime of burglary would be dwelling of another. Some states still require that the structure be an actual dwelling. That is a structure suitable for sheltering people. And in most states, though, it's a little bit more broad, and especially if you look at California's definition. Some states still have the nighttime clause, because common law specified that burglary occurred only at night under the cover of darkness. Now, some states may still have that, but typically most do not. It doesn't matter what time of day anymore. So hopefully that makes sense as well. Okay, so now let's talk about the severity of burglary. So are there different levels? Or let's just go with that, levels of severity. So most burglary laws increase the crime severity if the burglar possesses a weapon or some type of explosive. So a burglary's severity is going to be determined by a couple of factors. The first one is the presence of dangerous devices in the person's possession. And again, it could be any type of weapon, a handgun, a knife, etc., or an explosive. And the reason there might be an explosive is because maybe they want to open a safe or something like that. So, and that's typically used. Number two would be the value of the property stolen. And then the third one is whether the premise is occupied at the time of the burglary. So what we would call like a cat burglar is kind of a nickname, if you will, or a slang term for a burglar that's breaking into somebody's residence, in the middle of the night, kind of peering around, peeping in, and then breaking in when somebody is home. And that enhances the severity of the burglary, not because it's a residence, because it's now an occupied residence at the time of the burglary. Okay, so with that, let's kind of look at another section that fits into burglary, but it's just a little different. So we're going to talk about elements of the crime of possession of burglary tools, because a burglar is going to need some type of device or tools to carry out their burglaries. So a companion crime to burglary is possession of burglary tools, and this is an offense that's separate from burglary. Now, the charge of possession of burglary tools can be made even if the burglary has not been committed, if circumstances indicate that those tools were intended for use in a burglary. So hopefully that kind of makes sense a little bit. And the elements of this crime are possessing any device, explosive, or other instrumentality with the intent to use or permit its use to commit a burglary. So those are the elements. Now, there's a lot of different things that can qualify for burglary tools. So they include some high-tech items, or maybe items that might be harder to get a hold of, but it could be nitroglycerin or any other type of black powder or explosives, or any machine tool, an implement of similar type, chemicals, or any other substance designed for cutting, like a blowtorch, burning or prying open any part of a building or protective container, which could be like a safe or maybe even a metal door. So, and these are a little bit more, let's say, high tech, and maybe things are a little bit more secure. So you're going to need these types of items. Now, there are some other items that are kind of more recognizable. But again, you have to establish the elements of possession of burglary tools to charge and to get a conviction. But other things can be these tools. It could be pry bars, screwdrivers, which a lot of us have, right? Maybe not the pry bar, but the screwdriver. Bolt cutters, a pipe wrench, a slam hammer, or a puller to take dents out of a car. But it's also good for some other things. Tire irons, even blank or shaved car keys, vehicle keys. Those are typically used to steal cars. So again, you have to at least be able to establish the elements of the crime. So here's an example before we move on. You're patrolling in the middle of a commercial area, which is, and it's like 2 in the morning. So all the businesses closed, let's say at 9 p.m. Let's go even further, at 7 p.m. And you see a car that's parked with its lights off and 2 people are sitting in it. And there's nobody else around. And as you pull up, they start to drive away and you think that's suspicious, so you stop them. And when you approach the vehicle, you see it's 2 males and they're both wearing dark clothing. And on the floorboard by the passenger's feet, you see a couple of those knit ski masks, a pair of bolt cutters, a flashlight, some gloves, and a couple of handheld radios. You tell me what you would do with that. And you can question the people as to why they were there. So let's say you ask them some basic questions, which you can do, and they live 20 miles from this area and they really have no business being here. That's a pretty good indication that more than likely they had all that stuff because they were going to commit a crime, and the crime would have been burglary. So you would more than likely be able to get a good possession of burglary tools case out of that. But again, you have to at least establish the elements. Okay, so just keep that in mind. And here's a very unique type of thing that I wanted to show you, because this helps you learn how to be an investigator. So for a long time, and this was back in my younger patrol days, if you will, not too long ago, but a while ago, we were having some window smashes on vehicle burglaries, and we kept finding, for a while we couldn't catch anybody, and we would have all these, and it would happen in the evening, etc., and we just didn't know what was going on. So one night we got a call of a suspicious vehicle. We went out there and we found the vehicle. We stopped it, and in the possession of these 2 kids, they were juveniles, they had some broken pieces of spark plug, the porcelain part that you see right there. So these right here, and they were in their pockets. And come to find out, in interviewing these 2 kids, they were casing for some burglaries and they had done some in the past. But these porcelain pieces of spark plug, if you basically throw them pretty hard against a windshield, like a side window, it will shatter a window. And it really doesn't make that much noise. So it'll shatter auto glass. Because auto glass is meant to kind of spider and crackle, right? It's not meant to have these big shards hanging off it like maybe window glass. So you kind of learn something. So as an investigator, we started to figure out this is one of the tools that was actually being used. So kind of an interesting story. So take that and again, open your mind to the different types of tools that can be used. So now what about the burglar themselves? So the burglar, is often portrayed again as that masked individual with a bag loaded with, silverware and candlesticks, over their shoulder, climbing over a fence. But in reality, these burglars, they don't fit any set image, because they really are of all sizes, ages, races, and even occupations. And they are either amateurs or longtime professionals whose sole income is derived from committing burglaries. And a lot of them are drug addicts, by the way. And most amateur burglars are between the age of 15 and 25. And most professionals are between the age of about 25 to 55. The amateur is typically unskilled, who breaks in and kind of gets into the location in a very crude manner by breaking something or damaging something, and they take things like televisions or cash or cell phones or tablets or other electronic devices. Now, in contrast, the professional burglar is going to steal things like fur coats, which people still have, by the way, jewelry, and more valuable items, and has been carefully trained by other professional burglars. So they've worked with other individuals. Now, although most burglars' motives are monetary or drug related, sometimes it's the excitement of committing the burglary and evading detection is equally or more important than, let's say, the money, etc. And as one burglar had said it, it was a thrill not to know what was waiting for him and whether he would get away with the crime. So there are some that do it for the thrill, but most of it are going to do this crime for personal gain. And you can see, I just got a couple of pictures that you can see on the ways that people get in. Again, here's a picture of a Ring camera catching a burglary. This is someone breaking into somebody's vehicle, climbing over a fence. You can see he's using this as a little bit of a ladder. And then somebody inside of a residence, a burglar as well. Okay, so how do you respond? So now we know a lot about burglary. So let's talk a little bit about how do you respond to a burglary call as a patrol officer. So although officers should always follow department policy and whatever you're trained to do, and any procedure for responding to an in-progress burglary, because that's different than a report call, and after the fact burglaries, which means that it's going to be a report because it's after the burglary, after the fact, several common practices and techniques exist in most departments, and they have a response protocol. And on the way to the burglary scene, you need to pay attention and watch for anyone that's fleeing the area, any speeding vehicles or vehicles driving quickly with their headlights turned off because they forgot to turn them back on. Any suspicious looking people that might be around the scene or walking away from the scene or running. So be observant, okay? And again, any suspicious vehicles. Don't use your siren on the way to the scene. It's not like TV, because especially they're going to hear you coming. You're going to want to turn off your flashing lights if you have them on some distance from the scene so they don't see the lights, flickering in the darkness or even in the daylight. And don't use your spotlight or your flashlight to find the little address numbers on the house, because chances are if you're doing that, you're parking right in front of the house. And then they're going to know that you're there if you have someone actually inside of the location that's being burglarized. So you're going to want to park several doors away from the address of the call. Turn your radio down in the car and the radio on your hip, your handset. Close the car door quietly. Some vehicles, we've changed it a little bit, but a lot of times, remember, when you open a car door, the dome light goes on. So be careful of that, and don't slam the door getting out of the car. Approach the immediate area with, again, if you're going to talk to your partner, whisper, and pay attention to like keys that are hanging off you, or playing around with coins in your pocket or your flashlight. So all of these things you have to kind of keep in mind. And also Keep in mind that a suspect may still be on scene, even if the reporting party thought that they are gone. So you want to be as safe as possible. So again, proceed to the scene quietly, but be observant and cautious. Now, the first two officers arriving need to place themselves diagonally on kind of opposing corners of the building, and I'll show you what that looks like in a second. And this places each out of the other's line of fire, but in a position where they can see around the entire building. And then you're going to want to search the premise inside and outside for the suspect. Use cover and caution in going in and around corners. In a dark room, use a flashlight. Don't flip the room lights on, because then you want to kind of avoid being silhouetted. Or use a canine. That's another great option. So kind of think of that. Before I show you the little diagrams, I want to talk about one other thing, and that's false burglar alarms. But I don't want to lull you into a false sense of security with this. But false burglar alarms from personal, residential, and commercial systems are really a huge problem for policing, because data from the U.S. Department of Justice shows that about 96% of all silent burglary alarms activated are false. That's a lot of false alarms. And false alarms, they're typically caused by user error, although occasionally there's some type of equipment malfunction. And this growing problem of false alarms has led many departments to implement policies on how to handle these types of alarm calls. And some agencies have actually implemented what we call a verified response policy. And this means that they will not respond to a burglary alarm unless criminal activity is first confirmed through either an on-site security officer, which means they saw something, verbal communication with a resident or on-site employee, or either via a phone or intercom integrated into the security system so you can hear, or some other method of electronic surveillance, like a camera, or you can see, because there are so many false alarms. So there's good and bad to this. It's going to save the officers a lot of time and the city a lot of wasted time and effort and money by officers going out to false alarms. But what if the alarm is actually good? Does that kind of make sense? Or does everybody have to upgrade their alarm to include one of those things that I talked about? So if you want to know more, Fontana Police Department in San Bernardino County has implemented a verified response to burglary alarms, and they have their policy posted so you can look at it. All right, so I want to show you this, and then we'll take a little break, and then we'll come back. We don't have a whole lot more to cover, but a break may not be a bad idea. But this is typically how law enforcement officers are going to respond, and there's a couple of different ways they can do it. So if this dark blue is the alarm where the residence where the alarm is going off, usually it's a 2-officer response, sometimes more, but usually it's 2. So officers, again, they're not going to want to park here. So they may want to, again, turn their lights off, do all that stuff I talked about, and stop a couple of houses down from where, and you're going to walk. And you can walk across the lawns here a little bit if you want. Just try to kind of stay out of and the reason is you don't want to park right here, because if somebody looks through the window, they can see you. So you're going to want to park away a little bit, okay? And sometimes the response ends up like this. It depends which way the other officer is coming from. So if they're coming from different streets, different areas of the city, and if this is the house, they may actually end up like this, and this is okay as well, where one is here and one is here. And then this officer walks this way, this officer walks this way, and then they're going to check this house. Now, what I talked about initially about the corner to corner, that looks like this. So on a big commercial building, this isn't a bad idea, to where you have an officer here just to start, to secure the perimeter until you get more help. So if this officer parks here, he can see all the way down. And if this officer parks here, they can see all the way down. So we've got visual coverage on this entire thing. Now, it doesn't always work with a house because you've got houses here, right? So you can't. And if there's no alley behind here, it's just another house, you really can't do that. So if it's on it like a residential street, typically this is the what you'll see. You'll see the two officers that come in the same direction. You'll see the officers that come in opposite direction. And on a commercial building where possible, you're going to see the four corner response like this. So hopefully that kind of gives you a better visual on that whole thing. Okay, so let's do this so we don't have to rush. Let's go ahead and take a break. We'll call this part 1 of chapter 13, and then when we come back, we'll jump into part 2. So this will conclude part 1 of our chapter 13 lecture on burglary.